Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Midas Letter. My co-host Ed Molesky is still gallivanting around Europe, probably at this point, sipping on Rioja and eating, if I know him better, little bit of jamón ibérico de bellota, which if you don't know is the black-hoofed pig of Andalusia that dines on acorns and is the best ham in the world. I don't know how my Spanish accent morphed into a French one, but there you have it. I'm a little bit brain dead today. I got flooded, seriously flooded last night. The storm that hit us was just incredible. In fact, right now, as we speak, my floor is soaked in here and it stinks like mold. And I had the fans running, but I have to turn them off so that I don't just drown out everything here today. And holy shit, it was wet. It was wet. Anyways, today's show, I'm going to talk a bit about commodities. We're going to take a look at some of the stock charts associated with our guests. We'll take a few audience questions. What else? We will take a look at the statements by the U.S. Federal Reserve that allude to a tapering of quantitative easing as well as a lifting of interest rates, which probably explains the weakness in stocks lately. My guests today are multitudinous guests here. I have 5 guests, and I'm going to play them all because next week I got another 4 guests. I'm almost ready to go back to a daily show and do it live. That would help my brain fire on all cylinders. I'd be going less senile. Anyways, Dr. Draulio Barros de Araujo, excuse me, pardon me, sorry about that. He's the scientific and clinical advisor for BioMind Labs, Inc., trades on NEO under the symbol BMND. These are the same folks who brought you International Cannabis Corp. way back in the day. If you don't recall, that was it Uruguay or Paraguay where they were growing cannabis in a under military oversight. Anyways, interesting story. I'm sure it was a winner for somebody. Amy Emerson joins us now. She is the CEO of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, better known as MAPS, and she is the CEO of its not-for-public Public Benefits Corporation, and she'll explain what all that means in her segment. Michael Auerbach joins us again. If you don't recall, he's the founder of Subversive Capital Corp, which brought us companies like Tilray and the Parent Co. and Atai Medical and several others. And he's a fascinating individual and always seems to have superior access to deal flow. Old salty dog Terry Booth joins us live from Edmonton today, this week, tonight, tomorrow, during the night. And Terry is helming Australis Capital Corp again after a long and drawn out proxy battle. Interesting to hear about that. What else? We have Andrew White, co-founder and CEO of CHAR Technologies Limited, trades on the TSX Venture under the symbol yes. Yes, please. And so all that coming up. This week in Psychedelics news, Midas Letter is your station, your channel for all things mind-altering. But activists in Italy say they've gathered 500,000 signatures to qualify a ballot measure that would decriminalize personal cultivation and use of marijuana, psilocybin mushrooms, and certain other psychoactive plants for personal use. This is interesting to me because there's quite a debate raging about whether or not there will be a recreational psychedelic revolution. And many would argue that even in the medical realm, There'll be people seeking a medical permit to do psychedelics under recreational pretenses. This is common. This happens in the cannabis space all the time. How do I know? I'm not going to tell you, but I know this all happens all the time. If I was a journalist, I'd say I'm protected by legislation from having to reveal my sources. However, I'm not a journalist. I just don't give away my secrets. AWAKN Life Sciences has signed a binding share exchange agreement to acquire 100% in Axon, a leading ketamine-assisted psychotherapy clinic in Norway. Now, I don't know if you've tried ketamine, but I'm a little bit skeptical about that one. I mean, ketamine, yeah, that's always been a bit of a, I can't imagine how that would, well, I should say I can't imagine how that's going to benefit anybody. But mind you, I've never had psychological issues, arguably, some might argue with that, however. Also this week, NASDAQ welcomes a new psychedelics company in a $23 million merger and acquisition transaction. Enveric Biosciences closed its acquisition of Magic Med Industries through an all-stock transaction. In cannabis news, a new study coming out of the University of Chicago found that cannabidiol from the cannabis plant, or cannabidiol, if that's how you prefer to hear it said, has the potential to prevent and inhibit SARS-CoV-2 infection. Go figure. All we have to do is smoke a big fatty and we're immune to COVID. That would be amazing. That would be better than a COVID vaccine. I'm doubly vaccinated and I like to wear a mask in public. Just for the record. The U.S. House of Representatives on Tuesday approved an amendment to protect banks that serve state legal marijuana businesses from being penalized by federal regulators. What does that all mean? Anyways, that's one of the biggest problems for U.S. MSOs, that they can't really bank easily in the United States in most jurisdictions. And other cannabis news, Ontario, not the town in California, but the province in Canada, from which this live broadcast comes from, has reached a milestone of 1,000 legal cannabis stores. And not many of them are making money, I can assure you that. Everybody and their dog in this, in my county at least, is growing cannabis. There are even some large cannabis operations that have just stopped because they're not making any money. Cannabis is just so there's just a glut of it everywhere you go. So now let's cut to some of our lovely interview guests and get on with that segment of our show. Here's Dr. Draulio Barros de Araujo, Scientific and Chief Clinical Officer of BioMind Labs. Welcome back. My next guest is Dr. Draulio Barros de Araujo, and he comes to us live from Brazil. And he's the scientific and clinical advisor for BioMind Labs, Inc., trades on NEO under the symbol BMND. Dr. Araujo, very nice to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So tell us, BioMind Labs, what is the company's business?
So maybe I should go back a little bit and talk about our past,
sure,
so that you can understand our present and our future.
Okay.
I've been working with ayahuasca since 2006. So I'm a neuroscientist. I work as a professor at a university here in Brazil, and I've been serving, as you said, as a scientific and clinical advisor at BioMind. All the research that we have been doing with ayahuasca since 2006 was first oriented to understand the impact of ayahuasca in the brain. So as a neuroscientist, basically on these first set of scientific experiments, we had people under the influence of this psychedelic called ayahuasca inside an MRI scanner to understand the impact of ayahuasca in the brain, so the neurobasis of some of the effects of ayahuasca. So to understand how the visions are created, how the increased introspection is also affected by ayahuasca, and so on. When we were doing these trials, that was back in 2006, 2007, we recruited individuals from one of the churches in Brazil that uses ayahuasca. which is called the Santo Daime Church. Ayahuasca is legal in Brazil to be used for ritual purposes, including in 3 churches in Brazil. So we managed to recruit experienced people from one of these churches to come to the hospital and then have an MRI taken from their brain to understand the effects of ayahuasca in their brain while they were under the influence of ayahuasca.
Wow.
When we were recruiting these individuals from the church, it became clear that a lot of the people that were there due to the therapeutic effects that they felt from ayahuasca. So they spontaneously come to us and would say, I got better from a very severe depression, I got better from a very severe clinical case of anxiety, substance abuse, trauma like PTSD. So because of those spontaneous reports, we decided to open a second line of investigation. That was back in 2008, which had the perspective of bringing patients with treatment-resistant depression, so patients that do not respond to any antidepressant that we have today available. We would have them come into the hospital, and then we started a number of clinical trials with ayahuasca for treatment-resistant depression. We conducted basically 3 clinical trials. The first clinical trial was an open-label trial in which the patient knows that you're giving them ayahuasca, and that we tried with 7 patients, all naive to psychedelics. So that was their first experience with psychedelics. The results were pretty interesting in the sense that one day after the intervention with ayahuasca, we could see already a very significant antidepressant effect of ayahuasca. So that allowed us to increase the trial for 17 patients. So the second trial, we had 17 patients, all with treatment-resistant depression and all naive to ayahuasca. We brought these patients to the lab, to the hospital, to a university hospital, and then again, we had a single intervention with ayahuasca and followed with clinical scales, psychiatric scales. We followed the symptomatology or the severity of depression after the intervention. The results of the second trial was also very positive, and that gave us the possibility to conduct the third clinical trial, which was conducted as a randomized placebo-controlled trial or a phase 2B clinical trial. In this phase 2B clinical trial, half of the patients, all treatment-resistant depression, all naive to psychedelics, they came to the hospital, but then now half had an experience or an intervention with ayahuasca, and the other half had an intervention with the placebo substance. And for that trial, which we concluded in 2018, we also found a very significant antidepressant effect of ayahuasca. The point is, and that became very clear to us, is that for these 3 clinical trials, we did see a very promising antidepressant effect of ayahuasca, of this psychedelic called ayahuasca.
Sure.
But the point here is that the effects of ayahuasca is very long. It lasts, the psychedelic experience that you have with ayahuasca lasts for about 4 hours. And that's where BioMind comes into play. So now we have basically a join together of a experienced group of scientists that have been working with ayahuasca for a very long time, for about 15 years, with a very promising and very experienced businessman who is the CEO of BioMind, named Alejandro Antalish, who comes from the cannabis industry. He was the CEO of a very promising cannabis industry called ICC Labs, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I know Alejandro. I know him, yes. I've interviewed him before.
Yeah, so I believe that BioMind then is born out of this combination of a very experienced and successful businessman on one hand, and a very successful and experienced group of scientists that together are what we're doing together is basically to become a game changer in the psychedelic industry, in the sense that we believe that from this combination and from all the clinical pipeline and the research pipeline that we have ahead of us, will give a great contribution, particularly to mental health conditions.
Okay, so your drug candidates, so that you're basically isolating the molecules active in ayahuasca and sort of dose controlling them so that the effect is not, I'm assuming it's not 4 hours, a 4-hour commitment to do your drugs.
Exactly. So the idea here is to understand that although ayahuasca had a very potential antidepressant effect, the fact that you need to keep the patients for 4 or 5 hours in a hospital like we've been doing with our trials is very limiting on how broad can this perspective be. So if you need to have a single patient for a number of hours in the hospital, that limits significantly the number of patients that you can have going through therapy, for instance. So the idea here is to isolate one of the substances present in ayahuasca first, which is N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or NN-DMT, and then test the isolated form of NN-DMT also in treatment-resistant depression. And here, James, I have to tell you a little bit of the drive that is pushing us, which is we understand that we want to go for very short experiences. And we understand that to have short experiences, we have to manipulate the route of administration. But we also understand from our trials, so from our past, we also understand that a great part of the effects of psychedelics comes from the psychedelic experience. So that you have an idea, for instance, in our patients who participated in our trials, we would have patients coming to us at the end of the intervention and telling us that they felt as if those 4 hours of experience were like 2 years of psychotherapy. So they felt that they had 2 years of psychotherapy in 4 hours, and that was the reason why they felt better, or the reason why they think they felt better.
Sure.
On the other hand, we also had patients who came, who at the end of the session would say, I hate the experience for the same reasons I hate psychotherapy. So that is to say that psychotherapy or the experience appears to play a significant role in the therapeutic effect of the substance. So that is the reason why there is a compromise. We believe that there is a compromise in how short can the experience be. So the way that we are approaching this issue is basically by having 2 clinical trials on the way. So we have 2 clinical trials in patients with treatment-resistant depression with NN-DMT, but we are going to vary the routes of administration. We are going to use 2 different routes of administration. The first route of administration is an intramuscular route of administration. And with intramuscular NN-DMT, you expect to have an experience on the order of 1 hour. So it's short, it's shorter than the 4 hours, but it's not as short as the other route of administration that we are testing, which is the inhaled NN-DMT. And with the inhaled NN-DMT, we're expecting an experience on the order of 15, 20 minutes.
So just like mucotobenum.
Yes, exactly. So with these 2 clinical trials, we can understand and then move forward with a product based on NN-DMT using the most efficient routes of administration.
Wow.
One differential, James, that I want to touch with you is that we have at BioMind is understanding that we have to play in a triangle, which is condition, substance, and route of administration. So all of our trials are based on this triangle, understanding that depending on the condition that we're going to treat, we're going to use a different substance and a different route of administration. So on our pipeline, we have 3 molecules: NN-DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, which is an NN-DMT analog, and mescaline. These are the 3 main substances that we have in our pipeline.
Huh.
And for these 3 main substances, we're using different routes of administration. So for instance, for NN-DMT, we have the intramuscular route of administration, we have the inhaled route of administration, and we are about to conclude a new formulation for an oral route of administration of NN-DMT that is not ayahuasca. So we are creating our own orally active DMT.
So are you offering these treatments now? Are you offering these treatments now in Brazil?
So yeah, so what we have is from our clinical trial with ayahuasca, which is basically an orally administered NN-DMT. So it is NN-DMT being used orally. We have already approved for the ethic committee the second route of administration, which is the intramuscular route of administration, and we are now in these two clinical trials, both with the inhaled route of administration and the intramuscular route of administration. We are going to have we are recruiting healthy individuals at this stage, and first semester next year, we should begin our trial with treatment-resistant depression. So this is the schedule of these 2 clinical trials we have already on the way and already approved by our ethical committee.
Very cool. Are you going to be doing this in the United States or Canada at all?
So the idea here is to start these trials in Brazil due to our experience, due to the possibilities that we have to conduct these trials in Brazil, but with a very clear perspective of opening up these trials or having these trials serving as a base for the trials we're going to conduct in the United States particularly, and in Canada and Europe eventually. So our goal here is to conduct these phase 2 clinical trials in Brazil, and then when we move to phase 3, these phase 3 clinical trials won't be conducted exclusively in Brazil. It will be conducted in Brazil and in the United States.
Wow.
So the idea is to use the data we have from the phase 2 clinical trials done in Brazil and then expand that to other places in the world.
So what city are you based in?
Natal. It's a city in the northeast of Brazil. It's the Federal University of RN of Rio Grande do Norte. So that's the university where all these clinical trials will be conducted. So we have a very large university hospital. That's the same hospital where we conducted our clinical trials with ayahuasca, and now the future trials with NN-DMT, following by the 5-MeO-DMT.
Okay, and so this is really fascinating. This is exactly the kind of stuff I'm interested, Draulio. I would love to chat with you some more, but we have to leave it there for now. That's all the time I have. So thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, James.
Thank you. You too. Bye for now. Coming back to a chart, BMND. So there's the chart on BioMind Labs. Pretty static, wouldn't you say? Looks more like a Sanskrit or a Arabian symbol. Anyways, hasn't range bound to say the least. $1.70 to $1.80 could be a buy. We shall see. Anyways, coming up next on our lovely show, I have Amy Emerson. She's the CEO of a subsidiary, not-for-profit subsidiary of MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. MAPS is kind of the global think tank, academic sort of, what am I going to call them? Kings? No. Sort of the go-to research entity for all things psychedelic. And so there's not really an investment opportunity in this interview, but she says some great things that shed light on how we should be viewing other companies for profit in the psychedelic space. My next guest is Amy Emerson, CEO of Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS, Public Benefit Corporation. Hey, Amy, how's it going?
Good.
Good. Amy, so this is an interesting interview for me because it was just revealed to me that we were doing this with this nonprofit subsidiary of MAPS. And so my first question is, I didn't realize MAPS was a for-profit entity.
No, so I think you have it a little bit backwards. So MAPS is the nonprofit, and MAPS is the full-on name, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they're a nonprofit. And in end of 2014, beginning of 2015, we took my research team at MAPS and moved it into a wholly owned subsidiary just called MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. And so it is a for-profit, but within a public benefit corporation context. And it remains wholly owned by the nonprofit. And this is where we do all of our research.
I see. Okay. Why don't we start then with an overview of what MAPS and your research entails for those who haven't heard of MAPS?
Yeah. So within the Public Benefit Corp, we are in charge of the entire clinical research, clinical development program for MDMA for PTSD is our focus right now. But MDMA in general, we will be looking at other indications in the future. But right now we are in a phase 3 part of the drug development process. We're in our second phase 3 and about halfway enrolled. We'll be having an interim analysis at the beginning of next year and complete that study next year. We have breakthrough therapy with the FDA, and we'll be filing a new drug application at the end of 2022.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So then is the goal then to derive a sort of pharmaceutical product from MDMA, from the formerly sort of clandestine MDMA, for use in medical settings?
Yeah, so, and it's quite different than what other drugs, like the context of other drugs used for treatment, especially for PTSD. Right now, they're SSRIs, which are about symptom management, and this would be MDMA-assisted therapy. So it's a drug plus a therapy, and we really think that it is the therapy that's a very important part of it, and the MDMA as the drug is what opens people up to allow the therapy to work for PTSD. So it's a fairly new type of way to go through a drug development program with FDA, where it is a drug plus a therapy, because FDA doesn't usually and has not regulated therapy. So this is like kind of going into new territory.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. I guess that's why you're able to attract such a high level of interest, both in the mental health fields, as well as financially. I'm quite impressed with the sort of the funding that you've been able to achieve, and it's, in all respects, MAPS sort of stands at the pinnacle of, research and academia, as well as the emerging number of for-profit companies that are creating different psychedelic molecules from plants like psilocybin, from like ayahuasca and MDMA. This is very near and dear to me because I always felt that because of my sort of non-clinical experimentation with the psychedelics as a young person growing up, that I felt like it really changed my life and sort of opened up my heart, if you will, and. So I'm so welcoming to this whole idea of psychedelics going mainstream because I think the world would be a much better place. So then what is the goal of MAPS at this point?
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think the reason we've been able to have so much support from so many donors is because there's so many stories out there like yours, or that there's people that that have within their families people that have been healed through these substances along with therapy, and so it's something that people feel very mission aligned with, and the fact that we're doing it in a context of a public benefit corporation where we can maximize benefit, really maximize the accessibility of this treatment if it becomes approved. So I think that's why we've been able to really be at the forefront, and just dedication. Rick started this work 35 years ago. I've been working with him for 18 years on this drug development program. And I think another reason that we've been successful is by having donors support us instead of investors. We really had the ability to just keep going through this. Like if we would have been relying on investor money, there would have been an expectation of a return way before. So I think it's been important that we've done this in the way that we have. And now I've forgotten your other question. So ask me again.
Well, so I mean, if MAPS was a publicly traded company funded by investment dollars, obviously your goal would be to create shareholder value. But so that's my question. Besides the obvious, sort of evangelizing the sort of unpopular, or rather esoteric aspects of psychedelics' ability to ameliorate mental health conditions, what is the overarching goal and purpose of MAPS?
Yeah, so, there's the two organizations. So there's MAPS, the nonprofit that has a mission related to education and drug policy, and really making these, MDMA and cannabis available in medical and spiritual contexts. So there's a lot of drug policy reform and education and harm reduction work that's done. And then for my work specifically in the MAPS PBC, ours is a drug development initiative. So it's taking these things through a medicalization and through the FDA pathway in the US and through the regulatory pathway that exists in other countries as well. So it's really global, and we really want global mass mental health is the overall, just a tiny little goal there. And so that's inclusive of many things, not just this. So there's a lot of work that MAPS is doing on education and harm reduction and public policy. And then our work is supporting that by also taking things through in an evidence-based way to show safety and efficacy in a medicalized model. And the importance of a medical model is also so that we can engage payers, and that this treatments are more accessible by having payers and insurance companies take up covering the treatment.
Okay, so in that we're sort of an investment-focused platform, I have to ask, will there ever be any opportunity for investors to participate in any MAP subsidiary or offshoot or spin-off at any point? You should never say never, but right now that's not the plan. Right. We really want to keep this as close to a nonprofit context as possible. And then, we did make a for-profit with the Public Benefit Corp because MAPS would not have been able to sell MDMA within their incorporated mission as a 501c3. And the intent is to keep it wholly owned by that nonprofit. So, but there's a lot of other opportunities out there with a lot of other people doing psychedelic work. Yeah, you bet. So from what perspective does MAPS sort of view the monetization of psychedelic regulation, psychedelic sort of decriminalization and research? Do you see, my question is, my curiosity is, at what point does the for-profit sector become exploitive towards psychedelics for mental health remedies as opposed to really serving a public benefit?
Yeah. That's what we're constantly talking about that. And what we want to be doing is setting the stage and setting taking the lead in developing this ecosystem and showing that you really can put public benefit first, and then putting a pressure on the industry to follow that. We're not against people having a revenue. We need to become a sustainable organization as well, and we will make a profit from this. But the idea is that the decisions that you make should be driven by public benefit first over profit. And so we would like to encourage other companies to set up in a similar way and really do this different than what the pharmaceutical industry has done in the past. Let's show people that this can be done in a way that creates accessibility and isn't only about profit, but it's a respect for the very long-standing work that's been done with these substances throughout history, and for the people that need this healing.
Sure. Are there any of the for-profit companies in your sort of universe that you would be comfortable sort of talking about as an example of how it should be done?
That's a tricky one. I really am not in the space of feeling like promoting other groups. I have admired the way that Journey Collab was approaching this with reciprocity, and I think there are other groups that I'm starting to see take that more seriously, and I think part of it is because of the pressure that we create by us being a leader in this arena, and that it's also the psychedelic community has an expectation that if you're going to play in this field, there needs to be some way that you're giving back. So I guess I would just say look for companies that really prioritize that and have something behind the words, like some type of reciprocity model or plan for patient access programs. And we're also looking at a B impact assessment. So since we're a B Corp, we're not a certified B Corp. We're incorporated in Delaware as a benefit corporation. So there is no standing B impact assessment that exists through B Corp, but we are working on creating our own. And we feel like that could be something that's used in the industry as well for people to compare against other groups. Like, are they also having a positive impact in putting benefit first?
Mm-hmm. All right, Amy, I would love to talk to you for hours on end, but our time is up, and I really appreciate your participation, and thanks for joining me today. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet. Bye for now. See, I told you she was a great interview. What a scintillating personality. MAPS, yeah, they put out a newsletter every day that you can sign up for free, and it essentially is what is going on in psychedelics on the research side and on the social side. Also covers quite well the legal developments in psychedelics globally. If you like the show, you'll love our website. Visit us at www.midasletter.com for interviews with key CEOs, cannabis news, and to subscribe to our newsletter. My next guest is Michael Auerbach, founder of Subversive Capital. My next guest is Michael Auerbach, founder of Subversive Capital. He's a board member of Atai Life Sciences and the parent company. Michael, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you. And I love the fish in the background.
Thank you. Everybody loves the fish. Michael, you have quite a resume. You've founded some of the largest companies. I believe you did the SPAC behind Compass Pathways.
Yeah, Compass didn't go into a SPAC, but we were definitely one of the seed investors. Compass went public, I guess now it's been over a year on the NASDAQ. And we're all eagerly awaiting the results of their psilocybin trial, which we should hear about in the coming months.
Yeah, George is a regular guest on our show because we cover as much of the psychedelic sector as we can. On your website, it's very interesting to me that you make the case that you are targeting industries that require a sophisticated regulatory strategy. And I guess that's all part and parcel of being first. So how is it that you have the ability to commit capital to something that might be perceived as so high risk that it requires a sophisticated regulatory strategy that may or may not materialize in your favor?
So I'm a commercial diplomat by trade. I still work for the Albright Stonebridge Group, which is Madeleine Albright, the former U.S. Secretary of State's consulting firm. And what we've been doing for large companies since the inception of the company is to help large Fortune 500 companies navigate regulatory regimes globally and government relations strategies globally, for the most part outside of the United States. It's not a lobbying firm. And so, back in 2013, when we made our first investment, my wife and I, we made our first investment in Privateer Holdings, which, was the largest, at the time, private equity capability dedicated to the cannabis industry. That's when I really started thinking about, there's a real need to create a venture platform that invests in companies that require some type of regulatory strategy for the success of the company. And, cannabis was a great example because it was the first time in our lifetime we'll see something go from illicit to licit. And all of the regulatory issues that are involved in bringing that product online, either through state or federal regulations, global regulations, the UN. And I just found it absolutely fascinating. And so from there, we grew, the platform into investing in the psychedelics industry, and the drone industry, and real money gaming, new types of metallurgy. We were really interested in anything that comes across the government's desk, and we wanted to do it the right way. And so, if you think about, I just had a lunch with a former Lyft executive, and was commenting that between Uber and Lyft, Lyft worked with governments and ended up in municipalities and ended up in more cities than Uber. Uber would go in and sort of break things and just assume that the government would go along. And Lyft took a different tack in life. And so, we're really interested in working with companies that, want to work with government as opposed to, companies that don't.
Right. Interesting. So one might say that following Subversive Capital's investments is following the future of certain emerging industries. How does a John Q investor participate in your vision?
Yeah, so it started off as a family office with my wife and I. We've grown, we've brought on some partners, and we've deployed a significant amount of outside capital. We do all of our investments as an SPV, so we're not sort of your traditional 2 and 20 fund. We do have eyes on either later this year or beginning of next year, most likely in Q1, of launching a standalone venture fund in the traditional sense. And taking outside capital and institutional capital. Right now, it's mostly high net worth individuals, family offices that I've developed relationships over the past 10 years.
Sure. I want to talk a bit about the parent company because one might make the case that it has not been kind to the later investors who participated in the post-go public strategy. And how does a investor sort of protect themselves against being that late to the party? You guys probably invest at a much earlier stage such that a decrease in share price from the go public strategy is not a loss for you, but in some cases for retail investors who follow you, it is. So what would you say to somebody who is an investor in the parent company about investing alongside your products in the future?
Yeah, so let me be careful with what I say because we're sort of coming towards the end of the quarter here. Okay. And I'm the chairman of the company. But what I will say is that, from approximately November, from the election of 2020 to March of 2021, a whole slew of new investors came into the industry, not just into the parent company, but into all of the sort of major U.S. plant-touching Canadian-listed cannabis names. We had hedge funds come in, large institutions, some family offices, thinking that the election would precipitate regulatory change, which it will, but they thought it would be an accelerated regulatory adjustment, which it's not. Even I believe that we would see significant regulatory change before the end of this calendar year. I'm a little less bullish on that, although I still think there's a possibility that we'll get some legislative movement on the federal level before the end of the year. But it looks like this is really going to be a 2022 story as opposed to a 2021 story. And those new investors, two things happened to them. One is many of them lost custody issues with their prime brokers. And the other is that they just became impatient. And so there's been a big sell-off in the market. If you look at MSOS, the big ETF, they're down 30% on the year. Columbia Care is down 30% on the year. Glass House, which just de-SPACed a couple of months ago, is down 50% since their de-SPACing. We're down, I think, 60% since January. The stock price doesn't reflect the fundamentals of the company, not just our company, but all of the companies. And I think we're trading just above cash level at this point. And so it's a real opportunity for buyers. The problem is that the market that we're on in Canada, there's just not a lot of volume. And so the selling pressure, even if you want to sell 5,000 shares, it's going to affect the stock price negatively. And so it's just a difficult time. So what I would say to investors is, yes, it totally sucks if you bought at 10 and it's now trading at 3, or you bought at 12 and it's now trading at 3. But this is a long-term investment. I've always said from the get-go, even I started investing in cannabis 10 years ago, the exit and the liquidity event for cannabis is the end of prohibition and our ability to list these companies on U.S. exchanges. Sure. And if you're looking for a return before that event, then cannabis investing is not for you.
Right. It's not a day trade.
It's not a day trade.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's consistent with. So I actually recommended the transaction when the SPAC went public, and it initially performed adequately. So it was a day trade for somebody who wanted to day trade it, swing trade it. But that's what I ended up telling my subscribers is that, and I too expected an accelerated integration of the policies that was sort of alluded to by the Biden-Harris administration. And, understandably, in retrospect, it's not their top priority after the last administration. So, yeah, just be patient and wait. Other company that is doing a lot better is Atai Life Sciences. And so, the thing that the consistent pattern that I'm seeing here, from Tilray to all of these things is that you've got a sort of a superior access to deal flow relative to a lot of different groups active in the emerging industries. So then, are there other future industries that you guys are looking at, targeting, or sort of considering at this point?
Yeah, I mean, just on psychedelics for a second, we made 4 or 5 bets in the psychedelics industry, or 4 bets in the psychedelics industry, and then a ketamine play as well, which isn't a psychedelic. We're excited about our portfolio. We are sort of seeing a lot of companies, going public in Canada. It kind of reminds me of cannabis about 5-6 years ago, including some of the same players in cannabis are taking platforms public in Canada. I think we've chosen the most sophisticated companies, particularly Atai and Compass. But even Cybin and Field Drip are very formidable platforms. We like this industry a lot, but this is strictly biotech. I mean, this is FDA, EMA pathway, long-term drug development. We won't see a prescription drug other than the ketamine one by Johnson & Johnson. We won't see a prescription drug where your doctor will be able to prescribe it, in the next couple of years. So it's sort of long. It's a long tail traditional pharma play for this industry. That said, in thinking about your question around other things that we're looking at, one of the things we've spent a lot of time on over the past 9 months, particularly given COVID, and more, inspired from my 12-year-old son who, is in front of his screen all day long because he was primarily at home, is the metaverse. And so we're starting to really pay attention to some of the companies that will build not only build the infrastructure for the metaverse, and the metaverse is essentially, it's a terminology from science fiction. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Ready Player One, but Steven Spielberg sort of, memorialized it in Eric Klein's book Ready Player One in a film that came out a couple of years ago. But eventually, as our worlds have all moved online, eventually, this is going to be more virtual for us. And so, when you and I have this conversation, right now we're having this conversation through screens. In a few years, you and I will be having this conversation, in the same room. We just won't be in different cities. We will start to live in this more 3-dimensional virtual space. And so what does that mean, and what are the companies that are building that infrastructure? Facebook has sort of taken the mantle and said, with Oculus that, they're pivoting to a 100% metaverse company. I don't think Facebook is the winner here in sort of developing that infrastructure. But there's lots of great tech companies out there. There's lots of great startups. Even, I've got a Peloton behind me. Like, Peloton's a perfect example of a metaverse company where, eventually I'll be riding my bike with my friend who lives in Germany in, the Italian Alps. And it will feel as if we are there next to each other in this location. And I'll be here in, downtown New York.
Sure.
So I'm excited about this for a number of reasons. I'm excited because I think it's a great investment. Is that me? I'm sorry. I think it's a great investment thesis. But I also believe that, going back to sort of our traditional focus on regulated industries, everything that goes along with what happens in sort of our sort of real world in terms of laws and behaviors and rules and privacy, we're going to have to create a whole new sense of sort of a regulatory environment for the behaviors of human behavior and nation state behavior as it relates to living in sort of this next version of the internet, which is the metaverse. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about that and thinking about which companies we're interested in, and we'll be making some investments in this space in the coming months.
Interesting. I could talk to you all day, Michael, but we're running out of time here. And I have one final question. I've been approached recently by a group who is representing that they are going to create the first chain of psychedelic cafes. And they are sort of offering this projection that there is a psychedelic regime in the future not a psychedelic regime, but a recreational regime for psychedelics that, will ultimately become socialized. Is that consistent with what you believe?
Yes and no. So I believe that sort of similar to CBD, where it's now, everyone has access to it for medical purposes through the Farm Bill. But then you have GW Pharma, which has the prescription drug for the treatment of epilepsy and other indications covered by insurance, et cetera. So I do see that these municipalities like Oakland and Portland and now Seattle and some others, passing sort of not just decrim of psychedelics, but allowing access to things like psilocybin and other psychedelics for the treatment of mental health without going that prescription model. I do think that there's room for both of these verticals within psychedelics. The issue with sort of a psychedelic cafe is that's not really how people want to experience psychedelics. And so there's sort of the psychedelic party drug, which is, let's go to a rave and do psychedelics and enjoy, or, go and walk in the hills, et cetera. But really for the treatment of treatment-resistant depression and other mental health issues, you really need a guide. You really need somebody that's expert. And that's why a lot of people go on these retreats to places like, in Latin America and Central America and Europe, even places in the United States, where they're doing sort of high dosages of things like psilocybin, but they're doing it with a professional to be able to really understand what is happening with them as they sort of disaggregate their ego, and then they need to rebuild it with a therapist. So for it to really have an impactful state on your psyche and your mind, and your mental health trajectory, you really need. This isn't something that's going to be done in a coffee shop, sort of similar to Amsterdam or something like that, or in your basement, or with your friends. There will be a decriminalization movement. So I think what we sort of consider party drugs. I think people will have more access to that in a way that they don't have to worry about the legal ramifications of that. But I really do believe, I'm confident that, I'm sorry, I've got dogs in the background. I'm confident that that the majority of folks that want to use psychedelics like ibogaine and LSD and psilocybin will do so through a pharmaceutical approach, an approved drug, approved by the FDA or the EMA, insurance covered, and with a guide in some type of either estate, clinic, outdoor retreat, field trip is doing the ketamine clinics, which I think is a, sort of, if you think about it, like a meditation clinic, or, it's not just going to be in a doctor's office. It'll be something that will allow you to, experience this in a way that it's going to be helpful to your mental health.
You bet. Michael, we're going to have to leave it there for now. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, me as well. Anytime.
You bet.
Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, you too. Bye for now. So, such a shame you can't actually invest in Subversive Capital directly, but you can certainly follow along with what they're doing. As you said, a lot of these companies are long-term investments and not really for the day trading set. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Make sure you never miss a show by subscribing to our YouTube channel and clicking on the little notifications bell. If you're interested in getting monthly actionable investment ideas in the cannabis space to your inbox, subscribe to the newsletter at MidasLetter.com. Next up, our old pal Terry Booth, who's now the CEO, and has been for quite a while actually, of Australia's capital, operating as Audacious. How appropriate. Trades on the CSE under the symbol AUSA. Here's Terry. Terry Booth joins me now, CEO of Australis. Terry, welcome back.
Hey man, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Great to see you again, Terry. Tell us what's new with Australis.
We're very, very busy executing on a number of M&A transactions, JV transactions, trying to expand the footprint in the States, moving from this MSO3 type status into MSO2, then MSO1. It's been excellent execution. The team that we brought on board, the management team has been there for us. The executive team has been there for us, and the board has been there for us. When you think about it, all of those were replaced back in November, and then and I didn't come on until March. So a lot of work has been done since March, but we were able to plan properly, I think, in transitioning this company to back to a cannabis company.
Sure. So then what has changed really in the last year or two?
In my life?
Well, that might be a little personal. If you want to tell us, I'm sure the audience would love to know. But no, for Australis, what's really different now?
Still married, and the kids are all great.
Well, that's good.
2.5, doing great. But what has changed at Australis since 12 months ago? They went through a dissident battle.
Okay.
Dissident battle I was a part of. I joined it a little bit later than anybody else, but it was something that we won handedly. With them, we knew probably in July of 2020 that we were going to win this, so we started planning on how we're going to reset Australis. It was a company that was making a move to turn to fintech, and the shareholders didn't like that move. They wanted it to focus its efforts on cannabis. It didn't really execute that well in cannabis, not necessarily all its fault. It's the wild, wild west in America. It's 50 different countries. You have to know your regulatory surroundings, and those could change in a heartbeat. So not all on them, right? But the group that we brought in are excellent on a regulatory standpoint. One of the fellows that works with us was responsible for securing 64 licenses for another company. So we have great confidence in him. The plan that we put forward is different than most MSOs, in fact, all MSOs. It's something that's hard to copy as well because of the ALPS deal. So we're building facilities for other MSOs, and as part of that deal, we're getting some of the canopy in some cases, and so far so good. It's worked, and it gives us a piggyback, if you will, onto their licensing. So it cuts out all that time because we're a little bit behind the 8 ball, although I'd still call it the first inning in America. And you got to pick your states because some of the states are we don't want to be there yet. Some of the states aren't knocking on the door of adult usage yet, and others are. And the big ones are, of course, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, those East Coast guys, and that's exciting. At the 80 million people in a small area with adult usage, and nobody's there yet. Yeah, you need to be there, and we've hired, we think, the best lobbyists and connected with some of the best people in getting prepared for that entry into Eastern United States. That said, we're presently operating in Nevada, of course, our home base. We're in California now with these acquisitions. We will be in Massachusetts with that JV. Oklahoma, Missouri, we've got some derivative contracts that are now signed. So it's moving fast. There's a lot of work to do. We don't want to be buying any more Tonka trucks. I think I've learned my lessons. And when you acquire these companies that are losing money, not doing so great, you think, wow, what an opportunity. It ends up being you spend more trying to fix them. So we want accretive deals. We want EBITDA positive at least, and soon to be cash flow positive. And we've stuck our guns there. So it's interesting. The M&A team is less busy now because there's a lot of those opportunities. I shouldn't say not a lot. There's hundreds of them, but it's less. It's easier to decide, I guess, if you will. You know what I mean? It's just nope, we're not touching that one. They tell them come back next year.
You bet.
See how they're doing.
Okay, so on that note, what does the financial picture of Australis look like these days?
Well, I know if you looked at the year-end financials, it blew any previous year-end out by 1,400%, and we only booked like 3 weeks of revenue, right, as to when it finally closed, being March 31st. So, and that's all relative to ALPS. ALPS is a going concern company that's signing contracts and doing works. 70 employees. It was almost, you can almost call it a reverse takeover with a curtain in front of it, because we back-ended the deal so that it's milestone weighted, and that allowed us to secure ALPS. The other foundational deal was GT Therapeutics, again, another company that's actually making money. So it's just going to continue to increase on the top line revenue, and the EBITDA and cash flow should follow that. I can't give you guidance on where we're going to be or how much we're going to make. We have pro formas, we have a deck. If you've got someone interested in investing, then have them call them. We'll sign an NDA and we'll get them off a deck.
You bet. You bet. So tell me a bit more about the deal with ALPS. Like, so Thomas is a champion greenhouse builder, to say the least, in the global vegetable scheme of things. So to what extent is ALPS participation with Australis involved with growing vegetables versus growing cannabis?
I think it's not just I think it's a de-risk on the cannabis side of things. As you know, it's federally illegal in the States, and this sustainable vegetable thing is massive on a global basis. And we're talking to people in the UAE, in Dubai, and in Jordan. We're talking to people in Iceland. We actually signed contracts in Iceland. We've signed contracts in America on the vegetable side of things. It's engineering design work on the cannabis side of things. We all know his prowess there is, he built Aurora Sky. The thing was running just fine when he was around. I don't know what's going on now. I have no idea. But Aurora Denmark, Aurora Sun was underway when the peel backs happened. And his group also know how to build indoor grow. We want to stay away from the little tiny ones. There's a lot of tiny grows in the States. I'm talking 20,000, 25,000 square feet. So we're trying to stay above 50. But, interesting story, when Bellflower contacted Australis, they thought Australis was a capital company, and it was named Australis Capital. So they were looking for money. We told them at that time we're no longer a finance co, and we're a cannabis co, but let's chat about your project. I was on the call for an hour and a half out of 2.5, and these guys are seasoned growers out of Cali. They're great guys, unbelievable cannabis, by the way, excellent cannabis. They have a brand called Rapper Weed, and they are successful in obtaining a social equity license in Massachusetts, which is the best license you can get in Mass. It includes delivery, it includes the largest canopy, it includes manufacturing, it includes retail if you want it. So anyway, I digress. On that call, after 2.5 hours, I joined the last hour and a half, they were convinced that they had to have Thomas build this. And Joel was on the call as well. This is an indoor grow. And that convincing was just based on our experience. It's not like we're a bunch of smarter people. It's just that we've done it for 10 years. We've taken the hits to the head on these facilities. We've resolved many, many problems that you have when you get about 50,000 square feet. Systemic problems, powdery mildew, control of environment, very important. Nutrient delivery systems, which are the ones? They're all different cultivars. That's in our brains. And these guys were, as I said, seasoned cannabis cultivators. And at the end of that call, they knew we had to build this facility for them. So that says a lot to just our knowledge on the front end. And now we've signed with them to build their facility. And that's going to lead to other great things with them. We did get 10% of their canopy.
Yeah.
I didn't have to apply for a license. We didn't knock the price of Thomas's deal. But we said, you know what, we'd like some of your canopy to grow some of our great brands from GT and from Mr. Natural. So it's I think it's a good plan. And so far the ones that we've approached are all over. If you think about it, if we're building it and we're commissioning it, wouldn't they want us to stick around if they have a problem?
Yeah.
Because it's sort of on us, isn't it?
Sure.
So if we're there on 10% of the canopy, when you get these systemic issues in your facilities, it'll hit us too.
Yeah.
So we're going to be very concerned, and we're going to be very, hands and boots on the ground there. So it's ALT is just a windfall for us, without a doubt. On both the cannabis ability to grow, we have to follow that up with good regulatory prowess on which states we pick to do the work in. Like if Thomas is building a cannabis facility in Washington, I don't think I'd have a lot to do with it, just because of the restrictions on the regs. In California, you can't not be in California, but you need to be vertical in Cali, right? You need to be in each piece. So that's what we're working on, the deals that we're doing in Cali. And quite frankly, we are going to be totally vertical in California very shortly. And we've announced that. So, and chomping our bit at this East Coast stuff, it's the East Coast states, because they don't have a black, or I never call it black, a market grow, really. It's not like they get all their weed right now from California, Oregon, British Columbia, on the East Coast. Most of the weed comes from there still. So stepping into that regulatory environment where you're not competing against great grow as you do in California opens up an excellent opportunity for larger facilities that Thomas builds, right? Like in New York State, population justifies larger facilities, and all they have now is a restricted medical system. So New Jersey, we were scared of because they call it these super licenses, and all the incumbents had all the verticals, or allowed to have all these verticals. They just changed it, man. Right? They are now allowing for new applicants to be involved in all verticals. That's an amazing decision, and we hope that New York follows suit there. That'd be cool.
You bet. All right, Terry, great update. We'll leave it there for now. I'll come back to you soon. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Nice fish in the background there too.
Thanks. Good. See you soon. Bye. So Australia's capital kind of sucking hind tit since the carnage of their proxy battle sort of left a bitter taste, I'm sure, in lots of investors' mouths, and probably we'll see more from Terry and Australis as they put these transactions together, roll them out, and get things happening. If you're enjoying the show, subscribe to Midas Letter on YouTube so you stay up to date on everything investment. Next up, Andrew White, co-founder and CEO of CHAR Technologies Limited, joins us. Andrew White joins me now. He's the co-founder and CEO of CHAR Technologies Limited, trading on the TSX Venture under the symbol YES, and in the United States under the symbol CTRNF. Andrew, welcome.
Good afternoon now. How are you?
Good afternoon, yeah. I'm doing well, thanks. So let's start. What's the overview? What is the business of CHAR Technologies?
Yeah, the core of what we do, we've got a couple of business units. We're an environmental clean tech development and services company, but where the excitement is, where our growth is through our technology called high temperature pyrolysis. And, the way to think about that is we're basically heating stuff up or cooking it in the complete absence of oxygen. So put material in, heat it up to 850 degrees Celsius. Nothing can burn because there's no oxygen there. And it instead gets converted into two product streams. One we call biocarbon. It's a solid charcoal-looking material. And the other is a syngas that we can further process into green hydrogen or renewable natural gas. So some pretty exciting outputs from that system.
Yeah, interesting. So what are the feedstocks that you thrive upon?
So we have we talk about feedstock in the same way we talk about market verticals. So there's kind of three primary feedstocks, three primary market verticals we participate in. So the first is wood residuals, wood waste, woody biomass. So think like sawdust or, bark or offcuts from sawmills, construction demolition, wood waste, things like shipping pallets that have been collected and shipped up. We can process that. That's what we use when we make our biocarbon products that go into, say, the steel industry to offset their coal consumption. And that's also what we use when we convert this material into renewable natural gas. So that's wood waste, wood residuals, process it. So that's kind of option one. Vertical feedstock two is called anaerobic digestate. It's basically a residual, think like a compost that's left over from a biogas plant. And biogas plants are used to process sort of food waste, organic waste into renewable natural gas. And so I think it's important to kind of really emphasize that using wood, we make renewable natural gas. In this option two, we're actually supporting renewable natural gas producers using organic waste. We take that material and we convert it into biocarbon and either renewable natural gas or green hydrogen. So our recently announced project with Hitachi Zosen and Innova in San Luis Obispo is that middle ground where Hitachi operates a biogas plant making biogas. We take their compost, digestate, and convert it into green hydrogen. The third market vertical is biosolids. So that's the leftovers from a wastewater treatment plant. And in that case, really what the market opportunity is less so on the product outputs and much more on our ability to destroy some of these forever chemicals known as PFAS, polyfluorinated alkyl substance. There's a few movies out about it. Dark Waters is kind of the more prominent one. But these materials are in anything non-stick or water resistant. So think Gore-Tex or Teflon or that type of material. And our high temperature pyrolysis process destroys those contaminants. So it's still the same kiln system. It's still the same module. We build the same thing in these three market verticals. Kind of the way I like to describe it is we're building the same oven, and then each market vertical, we've got a different recipe book that we bring to the table.
Sure. So is this a carbon heavy emitting industry, or is this a carbon reducing industry overall?
So overall carbon reducing, so carbon negative. And it's negative for a couple of reasons. First is that our feedstocks are what's known as biogenic. So, they exist on the surface of the earth. We're not pulling carbon out that's been sequestered. Second is our plants are self-sufficient. So we get 850 degrees Celsius. How do we do that? It's with the gas that we generate ourselves. So we're not kind of burning natural gas to make green products. We're self-consuming some of our own gas. So that creates not only a very low operating cost because we don't have to buy energy, but it also helps ensure that we're in this carbon negative space. And then the third piece is if we're making renewable natural gas, we're offsetting fossil natural gas. If we're making biocoal, which we've branded Clean Fire, we're offsetting fossil coal. So we're allowing those fossil fuel, be it natural gas or coal, to remain sequestered essentially. So it helps our end clients, end users of the products to reduce their CO2 emissions. And we, at the same time, are carbon neutral or negative, depending on which of the products we're talking about.
So is this a sort of a platform that can generate carbon credits under any existing regime?
At the moment, it is in the voluntary markets primarily, and I should sort of preface that the use of renewable natural gas by, say, an industrial customer, if they contract directly, does reduce their GHG emissions. So depending on which regime, if they're, in Ontario and they're looking for compliance credits, if they're in, Quebec or California and they're in the WCI or, whatever the different regimes are, that absolutely directly helps them. As we make these biocarbons, some of the applications are soil amendment or remediation or other things where we're not consuming them. So it's not being used in a steel mill, it's going on soil. or it's cleaning up acid mine drainage. And in those instances, because we're fixing carbon, our process is almost like a natural carbon capture and sequestration. So we convert the woody material that took CO2 out of the atmosphere to grow the tree into a fixed carbon that sequesters the carbon in the soil. And under that scenario, there are a number of voluntary carbon credit markets that are in existence today that do buy those credits. And I think that opportunity will continue to grow into North America as well.
Sure. Okay, so then what exactly is the revenue model? Do you charge companies to take their waste off their hands? Do they pay you to take it away? I mean, obviously there's a market for any biogas, but what is the primary revenue streams?
Yeah, and again, there's a couple, and we'll kind of take it back to those market verticals. So when we're talking about wood, woody residuals, that area, we are pursuing a build, own, operate model where we will build, own, and operate the facilities ourselves or with joint venture partners. Generally, the wood has a low feedstock cost, so there is an input cost, but it's relatively minor because there's not a lot of other uses for this woody material. But it's got to be collected and processed and all that good stuff. The revenue primarily for that market is on long-term renewable natural gas offtakes. There's Canadian provinces that have mandates to meet certain renewable gas levels in their grid, and they're willing to pay a premium for renewable natural gas into those grids to meet those targets and mandates. The secondary product is, of course, the biocarbon or the biocoal that we make, and we can sell that into the open market because it functionally operates the same as fossil coal. So it's basically a drop-in for companies that are looking to reduce their GHG emissions. Mm-hmm. In the biosolid space, we're basically an engineering, procurement, construction management type company. We're building, designing, and selling high temperature pyrolysis units into that market. It's a much more mature market. There's some great, well-established market players that we can leverage our relationship with to get into those sales channels. So on the one hand, we've got nice long-term revenue. On the other, it's shorter term, but those nice equipment sale revenues. So we are absolutely pursuing both. And then in the center market, this digestate compost space, it's a bit of a blend. So back to the Hitachi project, we're delivering that under a build, own, operate, transfer model. So we build, own, operate it, we generate revenue off of the plant, and at some point there's a transfer initiated where we sell the system to Hitachi, and we get some additional licensing revenue streams after that transfer.
Okay, and where are you at now in terms of totally developed revenue streams and customers? Are you still in the development stage? Are you fully commercialized? Are you sort of transitioning? Where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, I think transition is a fair statement. So we've got a commercial plant in London, Ontario. We've got a commercial order for 1,000 tons of clean fire, which we're fulfilling right now, in the midst of fulfilling it, I should say. We've got our contract with Hitachi, so we're building a plant down in California, and we're looking to continue to expand. So, we've got our plant, we're building more as we're growing into this transition from having developed it to now full-on commercialization.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then in terms of profitability, are you profitable now, or do you have a sense of when you will be?
Yeah, we're generating revenue, I should say. We, in February, completed a $6 million private placement, which allowed us to invest in people and grow the team. So we were at kind of cash flow break even pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. Raising some money allowed us to make a lot of investments. So that brought us into a little bit of a spending regime because we are growing the engineering team so we can take advantage of these great opportunities. So we can revert back to cash flow neutrality if we had to, but that's not going to fuel the growth of the business. We want to be investing in team and projects and growing much more quickly than kind of that organic growth cash flow neutral model would allow us.
Right. Okay, well, that sounds like a really interesting project, Andrew. We're going to follow with interest. I really appreciate your time today. We'll leave it there, and I'll come back to you soon. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely appreciate the chance.
You bet. Bye for now. Now, there's a nice chart. Sure would have been great if we all could have invested back here at 15 cents, but now trading at 75 cents. That's quite a lift. 5x win so far for CHAR Technologies, so we'll keep an eye on that company. Sounds like it could be going places. If you like the show, you'll love our website. Visit us at www.midasletter.com for interviews with key CEOs, cannabis news, and to subscribe to our newsletter. Next up, I'm going to take some investor mail. Steve TV wants to know, have some of the large cannabis stocks like Trulieve bottomed, and is now the time to get back in? Steve, if I told you it was time to get back into cannabis, the large cannabis stocks right now, that would make me a giver of personal financial advice, and I'm not permitted to do so. I'll tell you what, though, I have not gotten back into any of the large cannabis stocks, and I don't believe that this is quite the bottom, in all honesty. I think that there's lots more room to fall. Typically, you know, we get to the tax loss selling season at the end of each year, and since there's been a great deal of losses in the cannabis sector among the majors, you could expect to see an acceleration of selling into the end of the year, barring any sort of headline from the feds in the U.S. that either, decriminalizes cannabis completely on a national basis, or it some other way makes national commerce in cannabis easier. And simply protecting banking is not one of those ways. So I don't think it's quite at the bottom yet, and I think it's going to go a lot lower. My timing, I'm looking at maybe very late December, last 2 weeks of December. That's when I expect to see a bottom, depending on what the whole market picture looks like, with the U.S. planning to start winding up interest rates and taking away stimulus. We could see a bit of an exodus, as we've seen in the past when governments try to stop the free money spigot. Wall Street tends to punish them with a complete and utter rout. Happy Glass wants to know, what is my true opinion on Kevin O'Leary Investments promoting. Oh, he is obligated to keep his assets covered. Well, as an individual who accepts compensation from select clients on occasion for promoting, I can hardly criticize Kevin. He has a way bigger audience than me. He's way more mainstream. He's CNBC, Shark Tank, etc. So I think he's probably a very expensive service provider, but he discloses it, and so I can't fault him for that. I'd say I have to stand back in utter admiration for the franchise that he's built. Okay, next question. Please keep sharing more of our commodities. That is from, who is this from? JD. Keep sharing more of our commodities views. Okay, well, so in that regard, let's pull up some charts of commodities, shall we? I'm going to go here to my commodities list. Okay, let's start with copper. Copper sold down to 409 again this week. And, copper's always problematic because copper demand stems from industrial demand, and industrial demand is always fluctuating, but thanks to the whims of markets and the government's whims, etc. So, I think that there's a lot of effort in the market among the US dollar interests to keep the commodity prices in a certain range, because if commodity prices took off beyond what they already have, and most commodity prices like copper are up over 100% in the last little while, almost 200%. So that's sort of problematic for the US Fed that wants to see the technology stocks and see the money markets and the ETFs and all of that continue to be well supported. So copper is, in diminishing supply. The quality of ore is deteriorating. Though there are a lot of companies that have existing supply that could turn it on if the price of copper justified the construction of new mines. I own US Copper, which I bought back in the summertime at 25 cents, 26 cents, 24 cents. It's now trading at 10.5 cents. So there you go. What kind of genius am I when it comes to copper? However, that being said, in US Copper, you could have tripled your money at least 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years. So I'm learning that making a trade on a commodities-oriented company like US Copper usually doesn't have a lot to do with the price of copper, but it does. Anyways, so that's totally inconsistent, and I apologize for that. Let's take a look at lumber. Lumber is near and dear to my heart because I'm halfway through a major renovation on my property here in deepest, darkest Haldeman, and I stopped renovating because the price of lumber has not come down. Spiked, as you can see in this chart, spiked back here in May at above $1,700 per 1,000 board feet for random lengths, and dropped to $465 and is now sort of ratcheting back up. The retail price of lumber is still up here, but that's very consistent with a commodity cycle relative to a retail product cycle related to based on the commodity. As they told me at my local home hardware, they wouldn't be lowering prices anytime soon because back here in the high price days, they stocked up. And now they have to get through all that inventory. So I decided that I was going to pause renovations until March next year, hoping that we get a better lumber price. So essentially, I'm going short lumber. We'll see how that works out for me. Gold, a monetary commodity, constantly under pressure by, there's just no new generation to take it higher. The people who would have been gold bugs in this new generation are fully immersed in cryptocurrencies, and that serves the interests of US dollar interests as well because it keeps everybody out of gold. Gold were to take off, confidence in the US dollar would collapse, and that's sort of the theory that gold bugs have been operating on for 20 years, myself amongst them. What I've come to realize, though, is that with the ability to produce liquidity and capital and exponentially inject it into the banking system, that it's very easy to create the appearance that the grass is greener over in stocks. And so that's just a corrupt and fundamental reality of the US financial system determining where the money goes by virtue of just printing it nonstop. In a different reality, that would be fraud and they would go to jail. However, that's an unpopular opinion. Probably has a lot to do with why Google pushes me down so that you can't search for anything and get a Midas letter result. Speaking of commodities that are non-existent, Bitcoin. Cryptos in general, everybody says it's going to be the next big thing, but I think they're right, but digital central bank currencies are going to be the next big thing. In fact, when you think about it, we've been trading in digital versions of all major G7 currencies for, going on 20 years now. Who doesn't use a debit card on almost every transaction? Who actually collects cash? What is debit but electronic representation of cash issued by the central bank? So this is all just a tempest in a teapot and a charade and an illusion, and I can't wait till it blows up. I hope it does before I die so I get to go. But chances are I'll be long gone and the illusion will still be alive and well. Yeah, who am I to talk to about crypto commodities? Oil. Now, oil is doing remarkably well. Everybody's still driving. The economy is coming back to sort of some semblance of normal as the entire world races to pretend that the pandemic is over just because there's a significant amount of the population doubly vaccinated. Personally, I don't see that as the case. Flu season in the Northern Hemisphere is about to begin in earnest in mid-October, late October, depending on the weather. And with 30% of Canadians, 50% of Americans, anti-vaxxers, the variants have a healthy population of petri dishes to continue to evolve and morph and mutate. And so this is the pandemic that's going to keep on giving people. And so yeah, the price of oil is high now, but I don't think that's going to last. U.S. 10-year at $1.40 based on the rhetoric coming out of the Fed that they're going to start raising rates. Well, the market just likes to be ahead of the Fed at all times. Ethereum, I think this is the only real crypto asset that has value in that it builds in contractual events and all kinds of other things, as well as stores value, but it doesn't pass itself off as a currency, which is why I can support Ethereum. And what else have we got here? Oh, I have almost forgot to mention. This show is sponsored by Voxtur Analytics, trades on the TSX Venture under the symbol VXTR, Victor X-Ray Tango Romeo. And Voxtur's subsidiary ANOW go to United Wholesale Mortgages, and they send people directly to Voxtur's subsidiary ANOW, Appraisals Now, for direct appraisals. United Wholesale Mortgages being the largest wholesale mortgage vendor in the United States for 6 years in a row. So this is going to really have an effect on reported earnings of the company in the next couple of quarters. I have to disclose that I'm a shareholder in the company, and I also have an option in the company in exchange for my assistance in delivering this message to the investing public. There, full disclosure, I'm biased, conflicted. If the stock goes up, I stand to win. Shouldn't invest in it unless you talk to a financial advisor who knows something. But tell your financial advisor to go to United Wholesale Mortgage, punch in direct appraisal. There'll be a link there. It takes us straight to ANOW, and do the math on that. Anyways, what else? Let's see. Who else can we talk? Let's take a look at my red list. Everybody wants to know what's on my red list. So the parent company, this is one of Michael Auerbach's, he did a SPAC with this. It was the largest cannabis SPAC in history at the time, $570 million, I believe they raised. Since then, the company's been a complete and utter dog, and I do talk to him about that in the interview, as you might have seen. So yeah, does that look like it's the bottom? No, I don't think so. Here's the chart on VXTR. VXTR shot higher as people began to realize that that link on United Wholesale Mortgages might hold some significance for what the future of Voxtur earnings will be. This is a company I watch because a friend of mine is the largest shareholder, and he notified me that I had warrants in it, which I'd totally forgotten about. I sold them out at 40 cents, so I keep an eye on it, but since then it sold off to 16 cents. Here's U.S. Copper. This is the copper company that I own, I don't know, 800,000 shares of, and I think I've got 200,000 in options from past contracts. Sucking hind tit in a big way, but that's because the Dixie Fire shut down their drilling program, and the price of copper is not helping per se, though it is up there. Luckbox, here's a company I own, I think 120,000 or 180,000 shares in, and it's trading near the price that I think I bought them at, but I'm not sure. I haven't really looked at it. Probably get the CEO on here again. SBBC, what was that? Simply Better Brands Corp. I owned this for a while, sold it right away. GT Biopharma, boy, this was a real painful one. I bought 30,000 bucks worth. It promptly became worth 15,000 bucks. Got out, goodbye. Grow Generation Corp, just a company I like to follow. Picks and shovels of cannabis, really sucking hind tit here as the cannabis market is saturated, a reflection of the cannabis market in the U.S. GMG, Graphene Manufacturing Group, selling off here. It's been as high as $4. I've sold about half my position. No, 2/3 of my position. Still got some, hanging on to it to see if it goes to the moon. But yeah, going kind of quiet. Here's a company that I like to follow, Ideanomics. This company recently bought 100% of a tractor company called Selectrac, and I've interviewed the CEO of Ideanomics, Bruno Wu. You can find that interview if you search on our site. Anyways, they bought 100% of my solar-powered tractor company, electrical tractor company, which I have one coming in January, so that's why it's on my watch list. Anyways, there's my show for today. A kind of brief, kind of all over the map, but what can I say? It's Midas Letter RAW. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Don't forget, write me, jwest@midasletter.com. Bye for now.